Today we're going to be taking a look at the glorious GMMK2, the successor to their original GMMK line of entry-level custom mechanical keyboards. It comes in 65% and 96% flavor, of which today we will be taking a look at the 96% model. Now if you're new to the channel or it's been a minute since you've seen one of our reviews, remember, not only do I like to review my keyboards, but I also like to modify them if it's reasonable to do so. So, as we go along the path here, I'll be discussing some of the modifications we made to the keyboard, as well as how to generically take the board apart and access all of these things. This is going to probably be a lengthier video, so for your convenience, there will be timestamps down in the video's description. Please avail yourself of those so you can skip right to the bits that matter most to you. You get some pretty basic accessories that come with the keyboard. You get a pretty basic cap puller, which I do not recommend you use. You also get one of those chintzy little switch pullers. In this case, I actually do recommend holding on to this, since I actually have an easier time getting to the switches that are in the numpad section of the keyboard using this switch puller versus the Rama puller that I normally use. You also get a pretty basic black braided cable here, no frills, nothing offensive either. This was the first thing we upgraded with a glorious coiled cable. Build quality is really good on the cable overall, the coil's nice and tight and hasn't showed any signs of unwinding on me recently. Small problems with some of the details on the finish for the aviator, but this was also a batch 1 cable. I can only imagine the finish has improved from here. At least I would like to hope it has. Sound off down below if you're having issues with the finish on the aviator connector for your glorious coiled cable. Now the board we're looking at today comes in a very typical ANSI English layout. However, you can also get it in several ISO variants, including in the Queen's English, Nordic, Spanish, and German. Unique things about this specific layout implementation is that there's a mild amount of explosion around the arrow keys and between the board proper and the numpad area. It creates a slight amount of separation here, which is visually more pleasing to some people versus a more collapsed 1800 style keyboard. Some special things to note about this board when you're looking for cap compatibility, however, you do have a 1.75U right shift here, 3 1U modifiers just to the right of the spacebar, and a 1U 0 key on the numpad, of which the pudding keycaps, which we upgraded to, unfortunately did not have. Smoj. The design language for the profile on this board retains a lot of brand recognition compared to GMMK1. It's less generic, while still feeling familiar for a gamery audience. It's definitely evoking a lot of that GMMK Pro vibe. The board also feels fairly weighty, largely due to the presence of 2 large metal plates mounted in the bottom case. As we can see, this board's using what's referred to as a floating switch design. This basically eliminates the higher profile sides that you see on a lot of custom keyboards and makes it so that more of the RGB lighting can shine through, and incidentally, it does make it a little bit easier to keep your board clean. The GMMK2 lineup does still carry over an integrated plate design. It's simple, it's stiff, but it is effective. This particular board is also not only capable of housing plate mount stabilizers, but PCB mount as well, but more on that later. The stock keycaps included with the board are fine. They're double-shot ABS with shine-through legends, they are OEM profile, and there is a die-sub single-shot novelty cap included with the glorious logo, which for some reason is cherry profile, while the rest of the caps are OEM. Because of where this cap's placed, it's not inherently a problem, but you will not be able to get away with using cherry profile caps on this board unless you're using a different switch that has a long pole stem on it, something like a Divinity Oni switch. The reason for this is that once you get down to R3, which is where your caps lock across to your enter key is, the profile for cherry gets low enough that it's actually colliding with the top housing of the switch there rather than allowing the stem to bottom out correctly. This is going to result in sort of a strange feeling switch on that row. So yeah, you're basically stuck with something like DSA if you want to go low profile here. We went ahead and swapped to PBT pudding keycaps for this keyboard. Again, you will want to watch for compatibility with this, and if you buy the caps from Glorious Direct, they should have everything you need to replicate the look we have here, only with the correct key in the numpad area. The stock plate mount stabs are likely fine, the housings fit in place reasonably well, and they do have a bit of G-lube on them from the factory, but they weren't really perfect, there was still a little bit of rattling there, and they're not clipped. This left the modifiers, as you'll hear in the typing test later, sounding a bit lifeless and mushy. Now, if you're the kind of person who would prefer a more silenced and muted, soft-feeling modifier, then this is fine. Go ahead and keep the stabilizers like they are. But an enthusiast that prefers a cleaner-sounding modifier is going to want to, at the very least, clip the legs off of these stabilizer stems. For today's build, we decided to upgrade these with Drop's Phantom stabilizers, but we'll discuss those in more detail in a future content piece. The rear of the case has a center mount USB-C port that's low on the board. This is great for avoiding placing too much tension on the USB-C connector, and the plastic underside has this glossy, glorious logo and flip-out feet. Why would you actually want more typing angle than what's already present on this board though? Seriously, comment down below if you would actually use the flip out feet here, because just thinking about it is giving me carpal tunnel. All cables on hand today fit just fine with no tension issues, though I do recommend if you have a coiled cable that you have the exit that terminates into the keyboard routed so that the cable is resting closer to the desk mat. Now for this particular build, I didn't end up separating the plate and the PCB from one another, but if you do, you get access to mounting PCB-Mount stabilizers on this keyboard. Sort of. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a catch with it. Because this board supports both PCB and plate mount stabilizers, you are restricted to stabilizer housings no wider than 6.25 millimeters if you're going PCB mount. This restricts you to basically Glorious's own GSV2 stabilizers, or in my own personal testing, TechC and C3 equal stabilizers. The problem with the TechC and the C3 stabilizers is you probably need to buy more than one kit to make it work on this keyboard because of the amount of 2U stabilizers you need. GSV2 stabilizers do come with everything you need in a much cheaper package, but because I don't have those in-house to test, I unfortunately can't speak to their build quality or tunability. Now let's touch on the big selling point for the GMMK2. The glorious Fox switch. Utilizing what I suspect is an all polycarbonate housing with a palm stem and a spring very similar to a Gateron Yellow, and being pre-lubed, these are actually pretty damn decent stock switches, and given it's only a small upcharge over the bare bones to get a keyboard that includes keycaps and factory lube switches that, by the way, exhibit basically no spring ping at all, I'd say the pre-built is definitely the way to go, since otherwise you can't actually get these glorious Fox switches, unless you join the group buy that is active as of this video. You only have about another week to get in on it at this point, but this will guarantee you an allotment of 120 glorious Fox switches. Now, it is worth noting these are lubed with G-Lube, which is a non-fluorinated lube that is not related to the GS-style lubes Kinetic Labs uses, neither is it related to a Crytox lube, so I would be wary of mixing this on a lube brush that's destined for those other lubes. Now, the one thing I will comment on with the glorious Fox switch is I noticed the top housing fit a little loose on my switches, so I went ahead and threw some KBD fan switch films at them, and that shored them right up, and also gave them a slightly deeper, cleaner sound to them. Full disassembly of this keyboard is actually not too difficult at all. That's one of the perks of having an integrated plate design like this. Everything's just accessible from the top of the board through the plate. There are several fasteners involved in it, but the main thing you're going to want to be careful of is not removing the fasteners but reinstalling them, because they unfortunately thread directly into plastic standoffs in the bottom case. I would like to see a revision of this case that includes metal slugs in the center of the standoffs, so you have more life cycles out of disassembling and reassembling this board for future tuning. When separating the two halves of the case from one another, and they should just separate from one another once you remove the screws in the top of the case, make sure you separate the JST cable before you start moving around anything else in there, because if you tweak this the wrong way, there is a possibility that you could damage or destroy the cable or connector on the mother or daughter board. If at any point you'd like to separate the PCB and plate from one another, all it takes is removing 4 fasteners that are on the underside of the PCB that are covered up by this black tape. It is worth noting that the case foam, I don't really think you should need to do anything with here. It's amply thick. However, I do notice that it looks like there's a little bit more pressure being applied to the bottom of the foam near the space bar than there is near the top. That could go a little way to explaining some of the acoustic strangeness we're hearing with this board. Now, as far as the software for this board is concerned, you do get access to Glorious Core, which does tie this in with any other Glorious peripherals you're using. It's very straightforward, relatively easy to use. I'm not a huge fan of the way color selection sort of inexorably changes the color of whatever switch you have selected, so you then have to go back and change things around again. It's a little kludgy in places, but by and large, it does the job you need it to do, and it allows you to reassign the function of any key on the keyboard other than its own function key. This gives you VIA or QMK-like functionality on an entry-level keyboard, which I love to see. So the TLDR on this board then is that it's a great balance of work and play, at least in the 96% form factor. While I don't have the 65% version on hand for testing today, that one for me personally is a little bit of a tougher sell even at the pre-built price of around $120 because the 65% market is really heavily saturated right now. There's a lot of competing boards out there. Though, as pre-built options go that come with pre-lubed switches that actually really don't need anything done to them other than maybe switch films, it is still kind of tough to disregard the GMMK2 65% entirely. But the 96% here, for me, makes a lot more sense. It's a lot harder to find full custom, full size, or full size adjacent keyboards. So the GMMK2 96% fills that niche pretty well. With the ability to dress per key lighting, and the ability to remap basically any key on the keyboard to whatever it is you want to do, 5-pin hot swap sockets, and really good included foam, there's really not a whole lot you need to do to this other than put the caps on it and stabilizers on it that you like. But there are some still missed opportunities that leave this board feeling a little lacking for me personally. The integrated plate design is really the most egregious error for me. It creates a sort of strange, unavoidable hollowness in this keyboard that I don't really feel should be present given the amount of foam that's been packed into this case. And that's been the case with basically every integrated plate keyboard that I've used. The sound is sort of uneven and weird across the board, and it's hard to tune for it with any of the typical case mods that you would do. But with that gripe aside, even considering the proliferation of more and more 96% boards like this that are coming out, GMMK2 as a fully built keyboard represents a value that I personally feel makes it worth considering if you're looking for a close to full-size keyboard that'll let you game and work on one device. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this one. Toss us a thumbs up on the way out if you liked what you saw. Make sure you subscribe and notified so you don't miss any of our content when it goes live. And if you feel like supporting the channel more directly and helping us continue to make awesome content like this, why don't you stop at one of our links below and buy us a coffee. And if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. You're the real goats. Take care.